The morning sun beat down on the small repair shop in Tucson, Arizona. Sarah Mitchell wiped the grease from her hands and stepped back to look at the old Cessna engine she had been working on for 3 days. At 52 years old, she ran the quietest aircraft repair business in town. Most people who brought their small planes to her didn't know her history. She preferred it that way. The bell above the door rang. Sarah looked up to see a young man in an army uniform standing in her doorway. His face was tight with worry. "Ma'am, are you Sarah Mitchell?" he asked. Sarah nodded slowly. She hadn't heard anyone in uniform call her name in 8 years. "Former Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell," the soldier continued. "Just Sarah now," she said, turning back to her work. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not interested." The soldier stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant James Carter from Fort Huachuca. We have a situation. 3 Apache helicopters are grounded with a problem nobody can figure out. We've had teams from Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and every expert the Pentagon could send. Nothing works." Sarah kept her back to him. "Not my problem anymore, Lieutenant. People are going to die, ma'am. We have troops in Afghanistan counting on air support. These Apaches were supposed to deploy next week." Sarah's hands stopped moving. She remembered what it felt like to be on the ground, waiting for air support that never came. But she also remembered how her military career had ended. The accusations. The hearing. The forced retirement that saved the army from embarrassment. "You've got the wrong person," she said. Lieutenant Carter pulled out a tablet and set it on her workbench. 3 weeks ago, this started happening. The video showed an Apache on a test flight. Suddenly, the helicopter lurched sideways, nearly crashing before the pilot regained control. Sarah watched, and her trained eye caught something the others might have missed. "This happened to 3 different aircraft?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Same problem. Starts about 15 minutes into flight. The controls go crazy for about 30 seconds, then return to normal. We can't deploy them like this." Sarah watched the video again. In 23 years of flying Apaches, she had seen almost everything. But this was different. This was familiar in a way that made her stomach turn. "Who's the base commander at Huachuca now?" she asked. "Colonel Robert Hayes, ma'am." Sarah's jaw tightened. Of course it was Hayes. The same man who had been a major 8 years ago. The same man who had accused her of lying about the mechanical failure that nearly killed her and her gunner. The same man who said she was too emotional to accurately report what happened. "Tell Colonel Hayes he can fix his own birds," Sarah said. The lieutenant looked desperate. "Ma'am, I know about your history with Colonel Hayes. But he doesn't know I'm here. This is bigger than him. The Pentagon is watching. If we can't fix this, they might ground the entire Apache fleet. That's 800 helicopters worldwide." Sarah turned to face the young officer. His eyes were sincere, worried. He reminded her of the young soldiers she used to protect from the air. "You flew Apaches in Iraq and Afghanistan," Carter continued. 400 combat missions. They called you Ghost Rider because enemy forces could never track you. You wrote the book on Apache maintenance procedures. Literally. Your manual is still used today. "That was a long time ago," Sarah said. "You were right about the mechanical failure 8 years ago, weren't you?" Carter asked quietly. "The one Colonel Hayes said you imagined?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about that?" "Because 2 months ago, the same failure happened to another Apache. The pilot survived and described exactly what you reported. The investigation proved you were telling the truth. But by then, you were gone." Sarah felt her chest tighten. 8 years of living with the shame of being called a liar. 8 years of knowing she had been right but having no way to prove it. "So why doesn't the Army call me officially?" she asked. Carter looked uncomfortable. Because Colonel Hayes is in charge of the base. He won't admit he was wrong. But ma'am, there are 18 pilots at Fort Huachuca who need those Apaches fixed. Some of them are kids, barely 25 years old. They're scared. Sarah looked at the tablet again. The Apache in the video was struggling, fighting against something. Just like she had 8 years ago. I need to think about it, she said. Lieutenant Carter pulled out a card. My number, ma'am. Please. We need you. After he left, Sarah stood alone in her shop. The Cessna engine waited patiently for her attention, but her mind was elsewhere. She walked to the back room and opened an old filing cabinet. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was her flight suit. The patches were still there. Her wings. Her combat badges. And the nickname, Ghost Rider, stitched in black thread. She held the suit for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. Lieutenant Carter. This is Mitchell. I'll come look. But I have conditions. The guard at Fort Huachuca's main gate looked at Sarah's civilian clothes and old pickup truck with suspicion. It took Lieutenant Carter coming to the gate personally to get her through. As they drove through the base, Sarah saw the flight line in the distance. 3 Apaches sat silent and still, like sleeping giants. I've set you up in a visiting contractor office, Carter said. Officially, you're here as a civilian consultant. Does Hayes know I'm here? Sarah asked. Not yet. But he will soon. I couldn't hide this from him for long. They parked near Hangar 7. Sarah stepped out and immediately felt the familiar smell of aviation fuel and hot metal. For a moment, she was 29 again, eager and proud, ready to fly into any danger zone. Inside the hangar, a group of mechanics and engineers stood around a table covered in technical manuals and laptop computers. They looked up when Sarah entered. She saw their eyes take in her appearance, a middle-aged woman in jeans and a work shirt, graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. Their expressions ranged from confusion to skepticism. Gentlemen, this is Sarah Mitchell, Carter announced. She's here to consult on the Apache problem. A heavy-set man in a Boeing contractor shirt laughed. No offense, ma'am, but we've had the best aerospace engineers in the country look at this. What makes you think you can help? Sarah walked past him to the nearest Apache. She ran her hand along the fuselage, then climbed up to look at the rotor assembly. The men watched her, some shaking their heads. 23 years flying these birds, she said, not looking at them. 418 combat missions. You want to know what makes me think I can help? Because I've felt this aircraft do things you've only seen in simulations. That was a long time ago, another engineer said. These are upgraded models. New electronics, new systems. Sarah climbed down and faced them. The basic architecture is the same. And from what I saw in the video, your problem isn't in the new systems. The Boeing contractor crossed his arms. We've checked everything. Ran every diagnostic. There's nothing wrong with these aircraft. Then why won't they fly right? Sarah asked simply. Before anyone could answer, the hangar door opened. Colonel Robert Hayes walked in, his face already red with anger. He had aged in 8 years, his hair now completely gray, but his eyes were the same cold blue that Sarah remembered. What is she doing on my base? Hayes demanded. Carter stepped forward. Sir, I invited Ms. Mitchell as a consultant. Given her experience. Hayes cut him off. Her experience includes making false accusations and abandoning her duty. Sarah felt the familiar anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. I never abandoned anything, Colonel. I was forced out. Hayes walked closer to her. You were unstable. Imagining mechanical failures that didn't exist. And now Carter brings you here. To work on critical equipment. The hangar had gone silent. Everyone was watching. With respect, sir, Sarah said, that mechanical failure I reported was confirmed 2 months ago. Another pilot experienced the same thing. The investigation proved I was right. Hayes's face darkened. That investigation was flawed. And you're not welcome here. Then you'll never fix these Apaches, Sarah said. Because your experts are looking in the wrong place. The Boeing contractor spoke up. Ma'am, we've examined every system. Have you checked the tail rotor phase adjustment under alternating pressure conditions? Sarah interrupted. The room went quiet. The engineers looked at each other. That's not a standard diagnostic, one of them said. Sarah walked to the table and pushed aside some manuals. In 2014, I was flying a mission in Kandahar. My Apache started doing exactly what I saw in your video. 15 minutes into flight, the controls went crazy. I nearly crashed into a mountain. She pulled out a piece of paper and started drawing. The problem wasn't in any single system. It was in how they talked to each other. Under certain atmospheric conditions, when the tail rotor reaches a specific RPM, it creates a harmonic vibration. That vibration interferes with the electronic stability system. The engineers crowded around her drawing. But why doesn't it show up in diagnostics, one asked. Because it only happens in flight, under specific conditions. Temperature, altitude, humidity, they all have to align. That's why it's intermittent. Hayes slammed his hand on the table. This is nonsense. Mitchell, you're leaving. Now. But the Boeing contractor was studying her drawing. Wait. This makes sense. Johnson, pull up the flight data from the incidents. As the younger engineer opened his laptop, Sarah continued drawing. The fix is simple. You need to adjust the phase calibration and add a dampening algorithm to the stability system. I can show you exactly how. You're not touching these aircraft, Hayes said. Lieutenant Carter's phone rang. He answered, listened, then handed it to Hayes. Sir, it's General Morrison from the Pentagon. Hayes took the phone, his face going pale as he listened. After a moment, he handed it back and stormed out of the hangar. Carter smiled slightly. The general heard we had Sarah Mitchell on base. He wants her to have full access to fix the problem. For the next 2 days, Sarah worked 18-hour shifts in the hangar. Word had spread through the base about who she was. Young pilots started stopping by to watch her work. They had heard the stories about Ghost Rider, the pilot who had flown into the worst combat zones and always brought everyone home. The Boeing contractor, whose name was Paul, had become her biggest supporter. I owe you an apology, he said on the second night, bringing her coffee. I judged you before I knew anything about you. You're not the first, Sarah said, taking the coffee gratefully. Can I ask you something? What really happened 8 years ago? The incident that ended your career? Sarah set down her tools. She had never told the full story to anyone outside the official hearing. I was flying a routine patrol with my gunner, Tommy Rodriguez. Good kid, only 22. We were about 30 minutes out when the Apache started shaking. Not turbulence, something mechanical. The tail rotor was fighting the main rotor. I tried everything I knew, but the bird wanted to spin. She paused, remembering Tommy's voice over the intercom, trying to stay calm. I managed to land hard in a valley. Tommy's back was injured. I carried him 2 miles to an extraction point. When we got back, I reported the mechanical failure. Colonel Hayes, Major Hayes then, said I had panicked. Said I invented a mechanical problem to cover for pilot error. But the Apache? Paul asked. They flew it back to base after repairs. No one else reported problems. Hayes used that as proof I was lying. Said I was too emotional, too rattled by Tommy's injury to think clearly. Paul shook his head. And Rodriguez? Paralyzed from the waist down. He testified that I saved his life, but Hayes said he was just being loyal. The review board gave me a choice: accept a quiet retirement or face a court-martial for filing a false report. So you left? Sarah nodded. What else could I do? It was my word against Hayes and the maintenance reports. The hangar door opened, and a young female pilot entered. She was maybe 25, with determined eyes and captain's bars on her uniform. Ma'am. I'm Captain Jessica Torres. I'm one of the pilots assigned to the grounded Apaches. Sarah smiled. Female Apache pilots were still rare. What can I do for you, Captain? I wanted to thank you. And to tell you something. Torres looked nervous. 6 months ago, I reported an issue with my Apache. Similar to what's happening now, but less severe. Colonel Hayes told me I was imagining things. Said maybe I wasn't cut out for combat aviation. Sarah's hands clenched. He said that? He says a lot of things to female pilots. Questions our judgment. Makes us doubt ourselves. 2 other women transferred out because of him. Paul looked angry. That's harassment. Why hasn't anyone reported it? Torres gave him a tired look. Reported to who? Hayes has friends everywhere. He makes or breaks careers here. Sarah stood up. Show me the report you filed 6 months ago. Torres pulled out her phone and showed Sarah the maintenance request. Sarah read it, her eyes widening. It described exactly the precursor symptoms to the current problem. If they had listened to you then, these Apaches would never have gotten this bad, Sarah said. Your observation was spot on. Torres's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You don't know what it means to hear that. The next morning, Sarah had the first Apache ready for a test flight. A crowd had gathered on the flight line. Colonel Hayes stood with his arms crossed, clearly hoping she would fail. Who's testing it? Sarah asked Carter. Captain Morrison volunteered. Sarah shook her head. I'll do it. Hayes stepped forward. You're not authorized to fly military aircraft. You're a civilian. Actually, Carter said, pulling out a paper, General Morrison reinstated her flight status temporarily. As of this morning, she's authorized. Sarah looked at Hayes. Unless you want to call the Pentagon and complain. Hayes said nothing. Sarah climbed into the Apache. It had been 8 years, but her hands found every switch, every control from memory. The turbine engines whined to life. She felt the familiar vibration through the seat, the power waiting to be unleashed. She lifted off smoothly, circling the base. 15 minutes in, the critical time, she held her breath. The Apache continued flying perfectly. Her fix had worked. She landed to cheers from the ground crew. Captain Torres was smiling widely. Even Paul and the other engineers were applauding. Hayes turned and walked away without a word. That evening, Sarah was packing up her tools when Captain Torres returned, this time with 2 other female pilots. Ma'am, we have something to show you, Torres said. She handed Sarah a tablet. On it was a video file dated 7 years ago. What is this? Sarah asked. Security footage from the hangar. The night before your Apache failed 8 years ago. Sarah watched the grainy video. It showed someone working on an Apache in the dark. As the figure turned, the security light caught his face. It was Hayes. Sarah stared at the video, her hands shaking. Hayes had been in the hangar the night before her crash. He had done something to her Apache. Where did you get this? She asked Torres. A maintenance sergeant who retired last year. He kept copies of all security footage because he never trusted Hayes. He heard you were here and sent this to me. Sarah's mind raced. We need to take this to General Morrison. There's more, Torres said. She swiped to another file. Maintenance logs. Hayes signed off on your Apache that night, but there's no record of what work he did. And look at this. She showed Sarah a pattern of mysterious maintenance signatures by Hayes, always preceding incidents where pilots, specifically female pilots or pilots who had challenged him, experienced problems. Paul, who had been listening, whistled low. He was sabotaging aircraft. Not to cause crashes, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. Just enough to make pilots look incompetent. To end careers. The hangar door burst open. Hayes strode in with 4 military police officers. Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for tampering with military equipment, he announced. Sarah didn't move. On what grounds? These Apaches you've worked on. My engineers found unauthorized modifications. You mean the fixes that General Morrison approved? Sarah asked calmly. Hayes smiled coldly. The general is busy with a situation overseas. By the time he responds, you'll be in custody. And these pilots who've been talking to you? They'll be under investigation for conspiracy. Torres and the other female pilots looked frightened. This was Hayes at his worst, using his power to silence anyone who threatened him. Sarah stood up slowly. You sabotaged my Apache 8 years ago. The hangar went silent. Hayes laughed. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? Sarah held up the tablet. Security footage. You're on camera. Hayes's face didn't change. That could be anyone. Poor quality video from 8 years ago. No court would accept it. Maybe not, Sarah said. But they'll accept this. She pulled out her phone and played a recording. It was Hayes's voice from 2 days ago in the hangar, but parts she hadn't heard before. Lieutenant Carter had been recording. Hayes's voice said, Mitchell was getting too popular. Too many young pilots looked up to her. I had to do something. A little adjustment to her tail rotor, just enough to scare her. I didn't think she'd actually crash. Everyone in the hangar stared at Hayes. His face had gone white. That's edited. Fake, he stammered. Carter stepped out from behind a tool cabinet. No, sir. It's not. I've been recording everything since Mitchell arrived. On General Morrison's orders. Hayes looked around wildly. You set me up. No, Sarah said. You set yourself up. 8 years ago, and every time since when you've hurt good pilots because they threatened your ego. The military police moved toward Hayes, but he backed away. You don't understand. Female pilots, they're not strong enough for combat. I was protecting the army. I flew 400 combat missions, Sarah said. Torres and these other women have proven themselves every day. The only thing we needed protection from was you. Hayes tried to run, but the MPs caught him. As they handcuffed him, he shouted at Sarah. You ruined everything. The Apache program was better without women like you. Sarah walked up to him. The 3 Apaches that were grounded? I fixed them in 2 days. Something you and your hand-picked engineers couldn't do in 3 weeks. Seems like the program needs women like me. The MPs led Hayes away. The hangar erupted in conversation. Torres and the other female pilots surrounded Sarah, some crying with relief. Paul shook his head. All these years, he was destroying careers. At least 12 that we can document, Carter said. General Morrison has ordered a full investigation. Every pilot who was forced out under suspicious circumstances will be reviewed. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. 8 years of shame and doubt, finally resolved. What will you do now? Torres asked her. The general wants to offer you a position. Training instructor, consultant, whatever you want. Sarah looked around the hangar. At the Apaches she had fixed. At the young pilots who reminded her why she had loved flying. At the engineers who now respected her expertise. First, I need to make a call, she said. She stepped outside and dialed a number she knew by heart. Tommy. It's Sarah. You're not going to believe what just happened. On the other end, Tommy Rodriguez, her former gunner, now in a wheelchair but working as a veterans advocate, listened as she told him everything. I knew you were right, he said when she finished. I've always known. Hayes is going to face charges, Sarah said. Your testimony from 8 years ago will be part of it. Good. Sarah, you saved my life that day. You landed a broken bird and carried me to safety. Hayes tried to make you the villain, but you were always the hero. As Sarah ended the call, she saw the sun setting over the Arizona mountains. 3 Apaches flew overhead in formation, their rotors beating a rhythm she knew like her own heartbeat. Captain Torres approached her. Ma'am. The pilots want to know, would you fly with us tomorrow? Show us some of those Ghost Rider moves. Sarah smiled. I'm a civilian now, remember? Not anymore, Carter said, joining them. He handed her an official document. General Morrison fast-tracked it. You're reinstated, Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell. Full rank, full benefits, and 8 years of back pay. 6 weeks later, Fort Huachuca looked different. Sarah stood on the flight line, watching 12 Apache helicopters prepare for deployment. The 3 she had fixed were among them, painted with fresh unit markings and ready for combat. The base had changed in other ways too. Colonel Hayes was in military prison, awaiting trial for sabotage, conduct unbecoming an officer, and falsifying official reports. 12 pilots who had been forced out over the years were offered reinstatement. 7 had accepted. Sarah now wore her flight suit again, the patches restored, including her Ghost Rider name tag. At General Morrison's request, she had agreed to spend 6 months at Fort Huachuca, training pilots and reviewing maintenance procedures across the entire Apache fleet. Chief Mitchell. Captain Torres jogged up to her. We're ready for the final check flight. Sarah nodded. Today, all 12 Apaches would fly in formation, demonstrating their readiness for deployment. It would be the largest Apache formation Fort Huachuca had seen in years. As she walked to her assigned Apache, they had given her the newest one, fresh from Boeing, she found a crowd waiting. 40 or 50 people, some in uniform, some civilians. Among them, she saw familiar faces. Paul, the Boeing contractor who had doubted her at first, now wore a shirt that said, Ghost Rider Ground Crew. He had extended his contract to work with her on new maintenance protocols. Tommy Rodriguez was there in his wheelchair, wearing his old army jacket. Sarah had flown him in for the event. Wouldn't miss it, Tommy said, gripping her hand. Watching you fly again, it's like everything came full circle. General Morrison had arrived that morning. The tall, silver-haired officer shook Sarah's hand firmly. Chief Mitchell, what you've done here goes beyond fixing helicopters. You've restored faith in the system. Shown that truth matters. Thank you, sir, Sarah said. But I didn't do it alone. She looked at Torres and the other female pilots. They stood taller now, no longer doubting themselves. 10 minutes to launch, the flight coordinator announced. Sarah climbed into her Apache. The cockpit felt like home. Every switch, every gauge, every warning light was exactly where it should be. She ran through her pre-flight check, her hands moving with practiced precision. Ghost Rider, this is Tower. You're cleared for takeoff. Sarah smiled. They were using her call sign officially now. Tower, Ghost Rider. 12 Apaches ready to fly. She lifted off first, the Apache responding instantly to her touch. One by one, the other helicopters joined her in the air. Torres flew on her right wing, another female pilot on her left. They formed a perfect V formation, then shifted into a diamond, then a line. Every movement was precise, synchronized. Below, the crowd cheered. Sarah could see Tommy saluting from his wheelchair. They flew over Tucson, where Sarah's small repair shop still stood. She had kept it, planning to return after her 6 months were up. But she had also hired 2 young mechanics, both veterans, to run it in her absence. As they circled back to base, Sarah thought about the journey. 8 years of exile. 8 years of being called a liar. But she had never given up on the truth. And when the moment came, when she was needed, she had answered the call. "Ghost Rider, this is Torres." "Thank you." "For what, Captain?" "For showing us how to fight. Not just in the air, but on the ground. Against people like Hayes." "You always had that strength," Sarah replied. "You just needed to see someone else use it first." They landed in perfect formation. As Sarah climbed out of her Apache, she found a surprise waiting. Hundreds of people had gathered, soldiers, civilians, families. They held signs, "Thank you Ghost Rider, truth wins, female pilots fly high." General Morrison approached with a box. "Chief Mitchell, one more thing." He opened it to reveal a distinguished flying cross. "For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. This is 8 years overdue." As he pinned the medal on her flight suit, Sarah felt tears in her eyes for the first time. Not tears of sadness or frustration, but of validation. Tommy rolled forward in his wheelchair. "Speech. Speech." Sarah looked at the crowd. Young pilots eager to learn. Mechanics who now respected expertise over ego. Families who understood that their loved ones were safer because problems were being fixed, not hidden. 8 years ago, I left this uniform believing I had failed, she began. Failed to make people believe the truth. Failed to protect my gunner from injury. Failed to stand up to a system that seemed rigged against me. She paused, looking at Torres and the other female pilots. But I learned something in those 8 years. Failure isn't falling down. Failure is staying down. Every one of us will face our own Colonel Hayes. Someone who tries to make us small, to silence us, to make us doubt what we know is true. The crowd was silent, listening. When that happens, remember this, your truth matters. Your voice matters. And sometimes, when experts fail, when systems break, when everyone says something is impossible, that's exactly when someone like us needs to show up. She touched the Apache behind her. These machines are powerful. But they're only as good as the people who fly them and fix them. We are those people. All of us. The crowd erupted in applause. Torres and the other pilots surrounded Sarah, hugging her. Tommy was wiping his eyes. Even Paul was emotional. Later, as the sun set, Sarah stood alone on the flight line. The Apaches were secured for the night, ready for their deployment to Afghanistan the next week. She wouldn't be going with them, her combat days were over. But the pilots who would fly them were ready, trained, confident. Her phone buzzed. A message from her shop in Tucson, small plane came in with engine trouble. Owner says he'll only let the famous Ghost Rider fix it. Sarah smiled. In 6 months, she would return to that quiet shop. But it wouldn't be the same. Now, everyone knew who she was. What she had done. What she stood for. A young enlisted soldier approached nervously. "Chief Mitchell. My daughter wants to be a pilot. She's only 12, but she heard about you. Would you sign this for her?" He held out a photo of Sarah standing next to her Apache, taken that morning. Sarah signed it, "To a future pilot, never let anyone ground your dreams. Ghost Rider." As the soldier walked away, Sarah looked back at the Apaches one more time. 8 years ago, she had thought her story with these machines was over. But sometimes, she realized, the best chapters come after everyone thinks the book has ended. Tomorrow, she would train more pilots. She would improve more systems. She would ensure that no one else suffered what she had suffered. But tonight, she would simply stand here, in her flight suit, wearing her medals, surrounded by the respect she had always deserved. Ghost Rider had returned. And this time, she was here to stay.